Okay, and we are live, guys. I am Matt Finch. This is Uncle Matt's D&D Neighborhood, and I have with me two guests who are people that I really adore, and that is Liz and Mike Stewart. Say hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
And Mike's camera is not functioning, or he doesn't have one on his laptop. I guess it is. So we're just seeing a very still but attractive picture of him wearing the top hat and the sunglasses and the capability to pull down the steampunk goggles just in case there's a fireball or something that shows up. Mike and I have known each other almost forever in internet years, because I think we met around 2004 when both of us were playing Castles and Crusades. We intersected on that one game for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk about a little bit about that, and then we're going to move on to the current game that Mike's published, and also the Save for Half podcast that both of you guys are on. So I guess let's start off with the question of Castles and Crusades, going all the way back to 2004 or thereabouts. How did you get into Castles and Crusades and the writing for it that you did?
Actually, it came about because I was a regular poster on Dragon's Foot at the time. I was a big supporter of AD&D 1E and, to a lesser extent, classic D&D. Ironically, as years have gone on, my interest in those have actually reversed. But anyway, that was when Trollord Games first came over and started soliciting playtesters for a new game. They had apparently decided that when 3.5 was coming down the pike, they had it, and they were going to do their best to create a game that was as close as they felt they could legally get to classic D&D, AD&D. So I jumped on board, along with several other people.
Mm-hmm.
Including you, I think.
Yeah, I edited or attempted to edit one of the players' handbooks. The Trollord Games is kind of famous for their editing mishaps.
Infamous.
But yeah, so I did some editing work on it. I didn't actually ever write anything for them. I wasn't really playing Castles and Crusades for too terribly long before I went on to just straight up AD&D. Went back to straight up AD&D, but yeah, for a while there, you and I were both pulling in harness on that one. Liz, what were you doing right at that point in time, 2004 Dragon's Foot? Were you gaming?
I was, and I had joined Mike over on the Trollord forums with the play testing and everything. So I was really big in trying to get CNC off the ground as well. I didn't do any actual writing for it either, but I was a big supporter. And eventually, once Crusader magazine came out, I think around issue number 8 of that, I took over the layout and general art monkey duties for the magazine and was working with Jim Ward on that.
Because you're a graphic artist in real life.
In real life, yes.
And her secret identity.
I always like to disclose people's secret identities if I can, because it's always fascinating to find out what game people actually do. I was just talking to Mark Taormino, who is an actor but is also a software engineer, which I thought was a great combination there. So Crusader magazine, and for anybody, and a lot of the viewers weren't around at that point in time, but Trollord Games had a little sort of imitation of Dragon magazine that they put out that was shorter, and so that's what Liz is talking about with that. So let's move on then forward in time when we start getting to you guys and podcasts. How did that all come about? What's y'all's podcasting history? Liz, you want to?
I was completely taken by surprise by podcasting.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I guess the initial blame really ought to go to Vincent Florio.
Okay.
And he and Mike had been corresponding online. Mike had gotten into listening to the RFI podcast and really enjoyed it. He wrote in some emails to the show, and somehow from there, he and Vince started talking. Vince got the idea to start a new podcast, but this one focusing on classic D&D rather than advanced. And so he had first asked Mike if he would be interested in being on the show with him. And somehow, I'm not exactly sure how, but I was also asked, and I told them both, he's like, I have no actual podcast or any broadcast experience whatsoever. And are you really sure you want to do this?
Neither did I.
Yeah, well, I'm a pretty introverted sort of person, and I'm sure anyone who has listened to the first 10 or so episodes, at least, of the podcast, probably noticed that I didn't say an awful lot because I didn't feel very comfortable speaking to the ether. As time went on, I got better at it, but yeah, I was very uncomfortable to start off with. It wasn't something that it's like, hey, I want to be a podcaster. But it's a lot of fun now.
Yeah, everybody's trying to make you into a celebrity. I mean, you're on the Frog God Games 5th edition game that they're running, and anytime you want to come along on one of my online games, you're welcome to do that. So, yeah, but everyone's trying to do that.
They need a cleric.
That's right.
Oh, you son of a bitch!
I know the truth.
So Mike, you and the podcast history. So it sounds like you were actually the initial villain responsible for Stewarts going into your then storied career as award-winning podcasters and fame on the internet. So how'd that come about?
Did we win an award?
I'm sure we won something.
I'll give you an award if you didn't get if somebody, but I'm pretty sure that you got some sort of award for the podcast, and if you didn't, you should have.
Yeah. Well, I was talking to Vince Florio, and at the time he was doing Roll for Initiative, and he decided that he wanted to do a podcast that concentrated on classic D&D, specifically the ones in boxes. Because one, he wanted to talk about a faster, looser, less rules-obsessed game, and two, he hated Rules Cyclopedia, so it had to be in a box. So we did that.
Hang on just a second. Hey, Liz, are you listening to this through speakers or through a headphone? Because there's a very slight echo on both me and Mike, so I think it may be you.
Let me check.
Whether you've got a speaker that's making actual sound.
She was originally having trouble with her computer, wanting to use the built-in mic over her headset. So.
That's what very often happens.
Yeah.
Okay, has it fixed now? I think I've got it.
All right, Mike, keep telling a story, and let's see whether there's any echo. We'll go back to the story.
Okay. Well, this was about 2010, and we decided to, at that point, they're like, well, 3 is a better number than 2 because that gets more discussions going. Who would we get for the third person? I said, I think I know a person who loves Holmes Basic, which is in a box, and would possibly be convinced to love to come on the show. And thus I volunteered Liz to get in, and she's, regardless of what she says, she's frequently the star of the show, especially when it involves kobolds.
Kobolds are a thing. Fill me in on the kobolds, Liz.
It just goes to show how being on a podcast can do things. Liz had a mild affection for the kobold, particularly the one in the AD&D Monster Manual. There's a picture of a melee between some adventurers and some kobolds. And there's one kobold in particular huddled behind his shield, and his face looks like a little puppy dog's about to get hit. And from that point on, Liz insists that all kobolds look like puppies.
Now, wait, which book was this in?
The first edition AD&D Monster Manual.
In the monster manual. Okay.
Yeah. I think, right, Liz?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I'm looking.
that
Everyone's seeing the back of my head right now in the cameras as I'm looking to see whether I can find the pictures.
Anyway, this evolved into her being more or less the queen of kobolds, and every kobold mention has to involve Liz. Kind of like me with a hatred of gnomes. I mentioned that once that I just didn't find gnomes terribly useful as a race, and somehow that got evolved. Everyone thinks I hate gnomes, so I kind of have to follow along with it now and hate gnomes. Because
I hate gnomes. It's one of the things I hate halflings less.
Well, my biggest problem with gnomes is they just seem like dwarf light. I mean, what really would they do except be an illusionist that a dwarf couldn't do better?
Yeah, no, I mean that's exactly right, and I think people say it's the illusion thing. All right, I'm going to hold up now the picture from the first edition monster manual that we are talking about, and so here is the kobold who looks like a puppy dog who is defending himself. It's the one being attacked by the dude in the hoplite helmet with the ant on his shield, right, Liz?
Yes.
That's the one. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now everyone is caught up on the artistic background of Liz and kobolds.
Totally puppies.
Well, the whole dogmen thing, it became official with Keep on the Borderlands that they were dog faced.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but then everyone's going, no, they're lizards.
They went back to lizards.
Yeah, because they wanted to make them like kin to dragons or something.
I don't know. I kind of like the new pictures of kobolds that have them looking a little bit like alligator, or really more like crocodiles. You know, they've got almost a long snout. The way that's been done for a while. I mean, that's
or a gar. Yeah.
Yeah, like a gar.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that look for the kobolds because they did really need something. You know, AD&D was so, it was clear and very Tolkien-esque that you had, the line of battle where you had, some sort of humanoid at each and every one of the hit die, categories. You had the kobolds with the 1 to 4. You had the goblins with the 2 to 7, I think it was. You had the orcs with 1 to 8. Then you had the hobgoblins with 1 to 8 plus 1. So something to distinguish those guys a little more, I think, is always good.
Mm.
Let's now talk about y'all's game. Actually, first question is about the weather because we are all in Texas. What's the weather like down in Dallas?
Hot.
Yeah, it's hot.
It's horrible here in Houston. The humidity is like you could cut the air with a knife.
Well, we hit 101 degrees today. I don't think it's terribly humid. I think it's mostly just hot. It's summer in Texas.
Yeah.
We had some rain in a couple of days ago, but it's been pretty clear yesterday and today.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, we had about 4 days of rain. I was starting to get really tired of it. But on to Victorious now. Okay, so I did my little complaining session since we're all, from Texas and we all get our chance to complain about the heat. Victorious, how did that start out?
You want to take it, Liz?
I might as well. Mike will say that it's all my fault. So
it's true.
I guess it really all started when I began. Sometimes I'll read books to Mike during the evenings. And there was a series of mystery novels by Carol Nelson Douglas about Irene Adler from the Sherlock Holmes story, A Scandal in Bohemia. Ms. Douglas did an entire series of novels all about Irene Adler and her solving mysteries. I started reading those to Mike, and that sort of sparked his interest in that era of history. And from there, I guess the next step was we were in a car trip together on the way to Austin to visit some friends in Round Rock. And to pass the time on the trip, Mike started just running a free-form game for me while I was driving on the road.
Keep her awake.
And at the time, our superhero game of choice was Champions, generally versions 1 through 3. So he had some of my Champions characters in this one-off game suddenly awaken and discover that they were in the 1890s, and they had no idea how or why they had gotten there. That was what really, I think, was the birth of what would become Victorious.
Yep, pretty much. Champions, as much as I love that game, as I've gotten older, it's just the mathiness of it has really bugged me. So I wanted to move to something a little more flexible, a little more free for the GM to fix things, for the maximum enjoyment of their players. And I'd played several superhero games: Champions, Villains and Vigilantes, Marvel Superheroes, Super Squadron, and none of them quite clicked with me. So I thought, well, heck, I'll just make my own.
So that's the origin story. And now tell everyone who's not familiar with Victorious what it is in terms of genre. How that particular mashup works.
It is a steampunk superhero role-playing game. Basically, the default setting is the late 1880s, early 1890s. And either we've got 2 supplement books out right now, one for London and one for New York. And you have a choice of either making a quote-unquote modern character that gets thrown back to this time period for whatever reason, because we all know comic books are full of time travel all
Absolutely,
over the place.
yeah.
Or actually playing a steampunk superhero of the era adventuring around.
And so what sorts of villains does one run into in that setting? Because one of the most difficult things, I think, with new genres, and this really is sort of a new genre, is what does the opposition look like?
Well, speaking on the trouble of the new genre, that's one of the reasons I put in the option of the fish out of water, because it then gives a role-playing rationale for the player to have their character go, what the heck's going on? What's the Crystal Palace? I've never heard of that,
Right.
That sort of thing. But as far as opposition, the book comes with about 20 characters pre-generated in the back, and about half of them are villains. Part of the villains, actually 2/3 of them are villains, sorry. But half of them are the quote-unquote traditional villains that you might be familiar with. Count Dracula, Dorian Gray, Jekyll and Hyde, Baba Yaga, those sort of things that fit well in the genre. Then there are the more traditional, there are villains who are the steampunk superhero equivalent of supervillains that are new characters. And there are a few neutrals there to keep things really spiced up. I only have a 3-point alignment system. So throw back to my classic D&D days, although it's good, neutral, or evil rather than lawful, neutral, or chaotic.
Yeah, well, it makes a lot more sense in a superheroes type game.
Exactly. But alignments aren't straitjackets either. It's more just to give a shorthand for a life viewpoint than something. Though the rules as written do reward good behavior over neutral or chaotic, because it is a superhero game.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the things that needs. I was going to say it needs to tag onto a genre, and that you always end up with the exceptions. But when you're trying to get the superhero feel to things, it's about being a good guy or a bad guy.
Right.
You could almost have the alignments be good or good and bad.
Right. And of course, the GM can do whatever they want with their own game. When they buy it, it's theirs. End, full, spindle, whatever. But that was my mindset behind it. I've often found that before I try to take out a rule of an RPG, it always helps to know what the author had in mind when they wrote it to begin with.
Yes.
To then decide, do I need to really change this or not? Or, that sort of thing.
And we'll dig into that a little bit before, and we're going to get to how do people buy it. But first, let's talk a little bit about the system. that you're using so that people can get a sense, and then they can look down in the descriptions and click on, if they want to, click on over and actually get themselves a copy. What sort of system have you got in place there?
You want to field that, Liz?
Well, the short and easy version is it is very similar to Castles and Crusades. It uses the CNC siege engine mechanic, and there are even hero classes that you can choose if you are more comfortable using a class-based system than a build your own.
Now let me interrupt you and let's jump back for just a second to the siege engine. And the siege engine is trademark term of Troll Lord Games, but it describes a resolution, a relatively elegant resolution mechanism based on the concept of a primary characteristic. Can you run people through how that works, Liz? Because you're saying siege engine, a lot of people aren't going to be familiar with it.
Yeah. Again, the short and easy answer is it's very similar to what Wizards of the Coast has done with the current 5e game.
Everything that Wizards of the Coast has done with the recent 5e game has a lot of similarities to Castles and Crusades. Many people have remarked on that.
Yes, it does. So I always like to tell people who's like, oh, I just love 5e. It's like, yeah, well, CNC did it first. But yeah, it's an attribute-based resolution system. And depending on, you can choose an attribute it would be called a prime attribute. And if you get a class in Victorious, usually that prime attribute has been chosen for you as part of the class template. If you are building your own character, you can choose what attribute will be your prime attribute. And so we'll say you chose strength as your prime attribute. A saving throw using that attribute you would only need a 12 or better on a 20-sided die. If the attribute was not a prime, then your base target number would then be an 18 or better. And as usual, in every instance, there are going to be things that modify based on the difficulty or the ease of what you're trying to do. You could add your level in some cases, depending on what skills you have, that would also benefit. But your target number is either going to be a 12 if it's a prime attribute, or an 18 if it is not a prime attribute. And it's a pretty fun and simple system, I find.
Yeah, it's very simple. For a moment, it sounds a little complicated until you think through what that means. That there's basically only two DC numbers, and it depends on whether it's this attribute or that attribute. And once you sort of got that in your head, the description of it always sounds way more complex.
Yeah, but bottom line, 12 or 18, that's all you got to know.
Yeah.
When I was writing Victorious, my original description section for the siege engine was 2 pages, and Steve made me extend it to 6 to put in a whole bunch of examples at every step. And I was like, why do we need this many examples? Like, you'd be surprised how many people get confused. Okay. It just doesn't seem that hard to me, but whatever.
Well, because it's like once you've actually done it, it's really, really easy. When you're reading a description of it, it takes a while, I think, to get that. But it's a snap once you're actually playing and you've done it.
True enough.
Liz, let me step back for just a second. You were talking about when you were talking about the prime attributes or the prime requisites, you suggested that there are these class templates, but you also said that you could do a straight up build. The game allows both of those 2 different methods of character generation?
Yes, it does. So depending on what you are more comfortable with, if you like class-based systems better, Victorious has an option for that. If you want the ability to, fine-tune and completely build your own from scratch, if that doesn't bother you, you can do that too. Also, I think we wanted to include the class-based option as well to encourage, more of a I guess we wanted it to be, even more of a mesh with Castles and Crusades and the other Troll Lord Siege Engine games. Um, Theoretically, you should be able to take, say, a Castles and Crusades character and port them over into Victorious and still be able to play them.
And we've done that at conventions.
And it worked out well doing that?
Yep. Very smooth. Nobody had any problems.
That's awesome. Let's I'm still sort of working around giving people an idea of what Victorious looks like on just a general sort of summary view. Let's talk for a moment about the place that the combat system is also going to be very similar to Castles and Crusades, which can be very fuzzily described as a simple down version of advanced D&D. Is that how the combat system?
I think you could say that. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, broad brushstroke, you're looking at something that is similar to advanced D&D. If you're not familiar with Castles and Crusades, y'all took out the grappling.
Yes.
Oh, that was your favorite part, wasn't it?
It totally. Oh my god. Oh my god.
Some of the game for you.
Some of the funniest things I've ever seen happen using that grappling system. I had a magic user once pile drive an ogre, I think was the result that I got. It was that was something. So no grappling system. Okay. Tell me a little bit about how it plays, because you guys run these games at conventions and obviously play them. There are a lot of players out there that you've seen playing the games. Is there a predominant play style or feel to it? I mean, is it a highly cinematic game in sort of the more nature of Savage Worlds, or is it sort of a little grittier like advanced D&D? How would you sort of describe or is it like mystery, like Call of Cthulhu? How does it all tend to come together? I know there'll probably be different people have different results, but what's your sense on that?
The feel, I usually run the games for my home groups and during the play tests, is I tend to run there are 3 settings in the game called Grim, Gilded, and Grand.
Awesome.
And what that basically says is what kind of game at the front end are you expecting? Grim tends to be, like it says, very gritty. Maybe you're only dealing with people with only a 1 or 2 powers. More, if you've ever heard of the character Karnaki the Ghost Finder.
Oh yes.
More a game like that is what Grim tends to result in.
By the way,
Karnaki is in the Rule Britannia book, by the way.
That's awesome. And if anyone has not read the Karnaki the Ghost Finder books, I highly recommend those, especially if you're into Call of Cthulhu at all. But they're really more ghost stories, but they are phenomenally good.
What I love about them is 2/3 of the time it's a fake.
Yeah,
but not always. So it's not like Scooby-Doo where you always know, there's an old man with a fog machine somewhere.
Right. It's a lot more like X-Files, where sometimes it's nothing and sometimes it's something.
Mm-hmm. So that's grim. Gilded is kind of in the middle. There's, people are more powerful and have powers, but they have real life problems and such. I'd say almost a Marvel Comics feel to that. And that's my preferred way of playing. Grand is 4-color, 2-fisted, big-chinned guys fighting villainy, totally over-the-top Rocketeer type stuff.
Uh-huh.
And the game will handle all 3, but I will freely admit it was really mostly planned for the Gilded, or slightly Grim, because I've thrown some Cthulhuoid creatures at Liz and the others at time or two. Nothing like a hunting horror to lighten up your day, right, Liz?
Yeah, I loved that.
Yeah, I could tell. But yeah, I tend to prefer a mystery type game, usually dealing with either a world beater or international espionage, because the game in the core rulebook lists about 30 different international organizations, and I'd say at least 25 of them were all real, and gives details on them, whether it's the Austro-Hungarian Secret Service, the Black Hundreds of the Russian Empire, so on and so forth. And they're all really great to use as villain, normal mortal people to fight your super mankind.
A lot of people tend to forget how complex the Victorian world was on the international, particularly Americans, because we learned those two things separately, because we learned here's our Civil War, and then separately here's Sherlock Holmes and the Victorian, and people don't realize this is all happening at the same time. This is one unified piece of history that we tend to see a little bit divorced across the Atlantic.
Yeah, both my master's degrees have been in the turn of the century historical fields. And Americans seem to just have a blurry place between Civil War and World War I, and they don't realize everything that was going on. And for instance, the 1893 World Columbian Exposition in Chicago. America's first known serial killer was there. He potentially killed up to 100 women. He built a 3-story building full of chutes, secret doors, crematorium, gas rooms. Yet nobody hears about it. What do we hear about? Jack the Ripper. 5 people. It's weird how Americans don't seem to really pay attention to that part of our history.
Yeah, it is odd. That's like a lost period of time in there, and the rise of socialism. A lot of people don't know about the international workers of the world, and just unbelievably violent riots and clashes between authority and labor groups.
The Black Flag of the Anarchists, another group.
Yes. And so it's neat. Although, I mean, does that get in the way at all? Does the lack of knowledge of history tend to handicap people when they first start playing the game?
Usually, in my experience, if people are concerned that they aren't really going to know the history well, they take the fish out of water reference option and take a modern person so they can play dumb. And being a history professor, I'm always leery in my books of being overly preachy. So I try to give options of, it's nice if you know this, but you don't have to. And one of the reasons I collected the 2 supplements, Rule Britannia for Britain and Manifest Destiny for the United States, is frankly to give a relatively short 40 to 44 pages description of everything they need to run a victorious game in that era, in that location. I mean, yes, there are tons of books, but that can be daunting to a person going in the library or going to Internet Archive, and there's hundreds and hundreds of pages. Like, you don't need all that.
Yeah, and it's so much easier when you're looking at gaming to find a quote unquote history book that distills it for you. Because, for example, one thing that TSR did way back in the day, which I thought was really neat, was they did a supplement called A Mighty Fortress, and what that was it was basically a setting for the 30 Years War, but it was just very much distilled information about the historical time period.
Was that H series?
God, I don't even remember what series it was.
Where they had Charlemagne's Paladins. And
they had the title of it was A Mighty Fortress. It had a dark green cover with the sort of stylized foil stamp thing on the front.
Yeah, I'll bet it was.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, it looked a lot of the splat books looked pretty much the same. This was just a really good one, I thought. But it sounds like that's roughly what you've done with Rule Britannia and Manifest Destiny, that you've encapsulated the history as the gamer needs to know it, and leaving out the various things that you'd find in academic books, where there's a lot of detail spent on things that wouldn't be relevant. You've got to sort of glean those out from the academic books, or if you're reading,
Right.
you know, Barnes and Noble popular, like I'm reading right now, Everyday Life in Byzantium, and you know, they gloss over the stuff that you really, really want to know about, you know, just because it's all going along there. So that I like books like that.
Mhm. And I don't gloss over, you know, the bad parts either. In the Victorious Rulebook, there's a section called Victoria's Secret, the dark side of Victorian life. And I talk about the, you know, the poverty, the inequality, the racism, the sexism. In fact, you know, part of the way you build a character with powers is you can buy shortcomings to buy extra power slots. And one of the things you can pick is just notorious. And that basically means you don't get along well with the public at large. And I put in there, you know, if you're playing a female character or a minority, you go ahead and take notorious, because that's kind of how you're going to be treated anyway. So you might as well get a penny out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not advocating that kind of behavior, by the way, to the slightest. It's pretty awful. In fact, I would hope that superheroes would work to try to improve that.
Yeah, and female heroes or minorities, you know, can be a public force to show the world at large, you know, hey, what you think about me and others like me is wrong. Maybe you should think again. So there's a lot of opportunity to change the world. And I think that's another reason why you don't want to get into too much detail in your histories, because the very fact that you've got people with powers doing things, um, established history timelines are going to change very quickly. And so you don't necessarily need to know what quote unquote really happened, because just the very fact that you've got people with powers running around doing things, you're probably going to veer off of the established historical timeline, no matter how hard you try, you know, in very short order. So
it doesn't matter whether in 1893 was it Cleveland or Harrison that was president. Who cares, you know?
Right.
And that's something I put in the front of those two books. I said, you know, history is followed where convenient here, but at any time where a plot or a good idea overcomes history, I go with the plot. So
Right. And so also, speaking of history, what is the you know, because virtually all superhero games have a justification for the superpowers, because a lot of times they crop up at a particular point in time, so that you don't have to work your way all the way back to the Assyrians and figure out what the result would have been if there were superheroes. How does Victorious handle the superhero powers? How's that explained?
Well, I lucked out in that regard, because when I was doing research for my thesis, I came across an event that actually occurred in, I think it was 1873 or so, where there was these incredibly bizarre lights appearing over the Atlantic and were viewed in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Iceland, all the way to Newfoundland. And nobody ever knew what caused it. And I read that and I thought, you know, that would be the ideal quote unquote event to start superheroes. And so I put that in there, and it implies that's where they come from, but it's really up to the GM to do whatever they want.
Sure. And what year was that that happened?
I think it was 73 or 77.
Okay. All right.
It's like in the flyleaf of the book, and I really should remember it now, but I forgot.
So that's why it's basically set in the 1880s. So that happens. You've had heroes for about 5, maybe 10 years at the point that the game's default setting picks up.
And as comic books inspired superheroes, quote unquote, of today to dress in funny outfits and beat the hell out of bad people, I have used the example of those superheroes that were stolen from the future and thrown back to the past. They're the ones that inspired the steampunk superheroes to put on weird outfits and beat the heck out of people.
Nice.
So it all kind of works out. Again, your mileage may vary. If you're a GM, you can do whatever you want.
So now, I'm gonna put links down in the description underneath this video when I put it out for the public. Tell us now, people who are people who have become fascinated with you guys over the course of this interview. Where do they find your podcasts? How do they buy themselves a copy of Victorious? How do they get a top hat that looks like yours?
Well, I got my top hat in Jefferson, Texas, actually. There's actually a store there in the town that does custom top hats and derbies, and it was actually reasonably priced. I was there visiting a steampunk group called Jefferson Airship. I'm so jealous of their name.
Oh my goodness!
It's so awesome. But they were doing a convention there, and a steampunk convention. And I got my hat there. Everything else I'll leave to the marketing department.
All right, marketing department, kick it loose.
All right. Well, you can find us on the Save for Half podcast at saveforhalf.com. You can also find Victorious RPG at victoriousrpg.com, along with the Troll Lord Games online store and at fine gaming stores everywhere.
Now, that'd be trollord.com, right?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes, trolllord.com.
Okay, now, people who want to get their copies directly from you guys are going to want to go to victoriousrpg.com rather than a place like RPG Now. I love what RPG Now does, but they take a commission, and so if you're directly wanting to support creators of the game, you're going to want to go to the victoriousrpg.com site.
Is RPG Now attached to Drive-Thru-RPG?
Yeah, it's all called One Bookshelf.
One Bookshelf. I thought so.
Okay. Yeah. And you'll probably, if you do go to victoriousrpg.com, we do have some free downloads of, little extras and stuff. But as far as buying the actual rule books, our links are going to take you directly back to the Troll Lord Games online store. So
we do have 4 free adventures and quick start rules with pre-generated characters if you want to give the game a whirl and see if it's for you before investing in the $29.99 core book.
Tell us about one of those adventures. Which one's your favorite and what happens in it?
Oh.
And we'll see whether you and Liz agree as to which one's the most fun.
Oddly enough, the favorite is the one that I came home near Christmas. I think it was early December, and Liz said, "Oh, by the way, I told everyone on the board that you're going to be putting on an adventure for Christmas for Victorious, so you better write one." Okay. And I actually enjoyed that one. It occurs in New York. It involves Baba Yaga, and she is
You have me already.
She has been given a oracular statement regarding 7 of 7, and she thinks she needs to capture 7 particular children by the 7th of December to use them in a rite. I leave how they're used vague because, it depends on what kind of game you're running.
Yeah.
And thus, it's the hero's job and the local supergroup for New York in the Victorian age called the Minutemen have been defeated. So it's all up to your band of misfits to go try to save the day. And it involves at one point them going into Baba Yaga's hut, which I play as a Tesseract. So, doors and rooms and weird things all over the place. So that's my favorite because I always liked Baba Yaga. She's fun.
You can't really go wrong with Baba Yaga.
No, especially when she's in grandmother mode. But really evil grandmother mode.
The only downside on Baba Yaga is when you've used too many Baba Yagas in your campaign, and then you just have to do something else. Sorry, my dog sees somebody walking a dog, and so that's what the noise in the background is over here. Liz, what is your favorite out of the 4 adventures, and what happens in it?
Oh, Well, I do like the Christmas one very much as well. I'm kind of torn between that one and the original adventure, which was in the quick start rules, and
hide and seek.
Hide and seek, and
Yeah.
it's also in the back of the main Victorious rulebook as well. So I like both of those a lot.
What goes on in hide and seek?
Well, the adventurers there, the heroes, are having to deal with a dead person and
well, his body is kidnapped.
Yes, dead person kidnapped from the morgue
by the name of Henry Jekyll.
And you have people who are actually, I may be getting this mixed up with the adventure that takes place right after that.
It's got like a sequel that it works its way into.
Yes,
there's a separate adventure called A Night for Jackals, which is the hide and seek can stand alone, but it also works as a good prequel to A Night for Jackals because it involves Professor Moriarty, the body of Henry Jekyll right after he shoots himself at the end of The Strange Case of Jekyll and Hyde, and the attempt to synthesize the Hyde formula from his body is what Moriarty's trying to do. And
that's awesome! Who thought of that? Who thought of that?
And in the middle of it, unfortunately, they inadvertently revive Hyde as this lumbering Hulk-like monster who's insane, and now the heroes have to stop him from rampaging through London.
Who wrote that one? That's brilliant.
Me.
That was you? That's a great story hook. That's phenomenal. I love that.
And then the module itself involves what Moriarty's doing with the formulas.
Mm-hmm.
So
then you're chasing down Moriarty. I don't suppose Holmes comes into it anywhere there.
No, I was afraid to do that because it's almost like sticking Captain America or Batman in an adventure. It's like everybody knows, wow, the Batman's going to succeed. We'll just hang around him until he figures everything out. So I was leery of sticking Holmes. There's no reason you couldn't, but it's not actually part of the module.
Right.
God, module. I'm showing my age.
Adventure. I call them modules too, and I go for I try and remember that they're adventures. People, use the word module has gone back to its normal usage now.
Yeah, when I'm dealing with young gamers, and usually that's 35 or younger. Yeah, I say module. They go, what? Adventure. Oh, okay, gotcha.
Well, okay, so we've covered a few different things, the way back origins with the Castles and Crusades, and we'll both elide over the enormous edition war that went on right around that period of time with all of us, and then we've talked about the Save for Half, and then we've talked about Victorious. Anything else that you guys want to talk about? Have we missed anything about Victorious? Did we miss anything about the podcasts? Do you want to revisit the Edition Wars?
God, no. That's one of the reasons I think I've drifted more to classic D&D is the community there is more accepting of variants and house rules and everything. Nothing against 1E AD&D folks, but there's some people over there who are militant.
Yeah, and you sort of have to have tolerance for house rules if you're playing, Holmes Basic or OD&D or there's just you got to have house rules.
You got to have house rules. You got to have ways to resolve certain circumstances that aren't in the books, and I like that. I like that empowerment of a DM or a GM. About the only thing I'll say, I don't know if we really specified, the Save for Half podcast covers old school games and the modern games inspired by them. So while we have touched on old D&D a couple of times, we've covered lots of other games like Top Secret, both the original TSR and the New World Order version that's come out. Gamma World, Doctor Who's FASA RPG, Super Babes. Yeah, everybody went silent on that one.
Yeah, well, I was just
but
like,
great.
Super Babes, okay.
Yeah, there was a comic in the 80s called Force, and apparently they got their own role-playing game they called Super Babes, and it's interesting. We covered it. We also covered Cyborg Commando. Not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but then again, that's a low bar. What other games we cover?
Well, it's not out yet, but we've done an interview with Michael Thomas, and we reviewed Blueholme, the Journeyman set of rules. So that should be coming out pretty soon, knock on wood.
Because you didn't take it in just one take and not have to edit it?
No. We've never been able to do that.
I'm doing pretty well on this one, except for the dog barking, and I think that adds flavor. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave the dog in there, so that I don't have to edit this. So nobody starts swearing or anything like that.
Everybody should get their say, even the dog.
Even the dog. Okay, well, with that, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And I would love to know. Actually, let me ask a question. When you guys come out with a new product, how do you bring it out? Do you go through Troll Lords? Do you kickstart it? What do you do?
Well, we've tried to be going through Troll Lord, but there's been kind of a log jam regarding cover issues there. But we are trying to come up with an actual 5-pack adventure in one book, 5 adventures, all set in the 1893 World Columbian Exposition. But usually we go through Troll Lord, and Troll Lord runs the Kickstarters. Okay, this is the first adventure post the big Kickstarter with all the stretch goals, so it's still a new thing for us.
Okay, well, let me know when you guys have a new addition to the game's catalog, and we'll get on and we'll talk about that when it comes out.
All right.
And
we appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I like to keep people, almost all that I do is about D&D, and so it's always nice to be like, okay, here's some of the stuff that's on the side, from D&D that's even if you're an absolute diehard D&D player, you'll still enjoy these as sort of a genre switch, because they're close enough that you're not doing something that's just completely constructed differently.
Right.
So all right, well, let's go ahead and we will bring it to a close. Thank you ever so much, Liz and Mike. These are, once again, the Stewarts. So say goodbye to your fans.
Goodbye. Thank you for having us on. We appreciate it.
Goodbye. Bully!
Wonderful. And I will say to everybody, no matter what kind of D&D it is that you play, imagine the hell out of it.